Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. We'll begin with the beginning of chapter 2. Chapter 2, verse 2, Hashem says to Moshe and Aaron, Ishal deglovo sos levei savosam yachru b'nei Yisrael. Each of the members of Bnei Israel need to camp now by their flags, meaning by their tribes. And everyone's positioned in some way around the tent of meeting. Verse 3, V'achonim keim mizracha dego machne Yudah l'tzivosam. The ones on the east are the tribe of Yehuda. The head of the tribe of Yehuda is Nachshon ben Aminadav. Verse 4, Utzva'ov kudehem arba'av v'shivim elef v'sheish meos. Their numbers are, presumably this is males over the age of 20, but 74,600. Okay, so technical question. We just got through the first chapter, which went into great detail of the numbers of each tribe and the total number of the tribes. So why exactly does it have to tell me the number again? Is this, and who's even saying this number? Was this a new count? Is the Torah, is it the same number? Is it a different number? It's just a little confusing when you sort of see in the context of the first chapter. So it's a very interesting Ramban over here. Ramban on Pasuk Dalet. The Talmud Tzva'ov kudehem kolab kudim machne Yudah. V'chein kulam heim divrei Hashem el Moshe. When this number right here is a continuation of what God is saying to Moshe. We began today's chapter that God is speaking to Moshe. So God says to Yehuda should camp on the east. And he says, and by the way, the numbers of Yehuda are da-da-da-da. It's not like Moshe counted them again now. Moshe just got finished counting them. So God is saying to Moshe, and by the way, the numbers of the tribe of Judah, and that's what he does for each tribe, are such and such. Okay, so that's just an interesting shot. Now, the obvious question is, why in the world does God see the need to tell this to Moshe? He just did a census. The Hizkir calls that, and he mentions this, lo dia, to inform, shemime haminyan, viad shenisknu hanmachanos, v'chanu, kein l'degleim v'chein nasahu, lo nifgad mehem ish. That from the day that the census was completed until there was clear formation of the camps and there was a whole plan of how to travel, etc., nobody passed away. V'zeh ma'aseh nes. This was miraculous. Sheyu esrim yom shleyamus echad mikol ha'am hagadol hazeh. It's a large nation, hundreds of thousands of people, and over a 20-day period from the census through once everything was really clear in terms of the encampment, nobody died. So it's just an interesting Ramban, just in Pshat in the Psukim. Okay, going at chapter 3, verse 14. Chapter 3, verse 14. Vaydaber Hashem Moshe Bamidbar Sinai Lemor. Hashem says to Moshe, verse 15, Code es b'nei Levi levei savosam lemishposam. Count the people of Levi. Kol zachar mimen chodesh v'ma'ala tifkedei. You should count them, every male from a month and up. So it's a whole different calculation system as it is for the other tribes. Levi wasn't counted like the other tribes. Levi, and of course the Kohanim come from Levi. Levi stands alone. Fine. Now there's a very important Ramban over here on Pasuk Yudalid. Skip the first 5 or 6 lines of the Ramban. In mine, it's a new paragraph. V'hine lo hayu shevet halviim kishar hashvatim. The tribe of Levi was not like the other tribes. Kimi ben chodesh v'mala lo hayu rak esrim ushnayim elef. Their numbers of a month and up was 22,000. Umi ben shloshim shana kulam shmonas alafim. By the way, there's another counting. One counting is just the number of them alive. Another counting has to do with old enough to serve in the Mishkan. So that counting didn't start from the age of 20. That counting started from the age of 30. It was 8,000. I mean, just to glance back at the pasuk we had before with Yehuda, just as a random contrast. So this is 20 and up. It was 74,600. A month and up of Levi is 22,000, over 50,000 less than the people of Yehuda, and it was starting at a younger age. So it's very striking that Levi was so much smaller, and Yehuda's numbers are not out of whack with the other tribes. Yehuda's numbers are much more indicative than Levi's are of the other tribes. V'hine lo yagimu ben esrim shana v'mala lachatzi shevet miYisrael hapachos shebakula. There's no way that if Levi was counting 20 years and up, that they'd even be half of the smallest tribe besides them. So Levi is extremely small compared to the other tribes. You know, those on the Navi class will certainly not be surprised by this reference. Could be that the sanctity of the Aron, maybe, you have stories that like a Levi makes a mistake when he's carrying the Aron and people die. The Ramban says, don't even try that here. They weren't even carrying the Aron yet. So that's, it's even if you're going to get creative with that concept, not relevant here. That doesn't explain why there's so few of them. It's really a befuddling thing. If the Levi is the tribe which is most dedicated and devoted to the service of God, and they're the ones that are so small compared to everyone else, why would that be? I think, says the Ramban, really interesting answer. The Ramban says there's a famous medrash that the Levium didn't have to work in Egypt, didn't have to be slaves to Paro in Egypt, that Paro respected the idea of clergy, whatever exactly that meant for Klal Yisrael at the time, and Levi even then in Egypt was considered the more spiritual element of the Jewish people, and therefore Paro was all right with them not being slaves. Because the Egyptians were working the Jews so hard, and the motivation that the Egyptians had in working the Jews so hard was to make them smaller in number. Therefore, so God specifically made them larger in number to show that if the Egyptians are trying to mess up the Jews, God's got a response for them. The famous pasuk that we have in Parshas Shmos, Kasher Yanu Oso, Hein Yirbev V'chein Yifrotz, that the more the Egyptians would afflict the Jews, the more the Jews grew in number. So basically the Ramban says, look, the fact that the Jewish people were so many in number was a miracle. It's a miracle dating back to Egypt, and was God's response to the Egyptian efforts to quash the Jews. And the harder they worked the Jews, the greater the Jews increased the number. But Levi was never worked hard like the other Jews. So Levi didn't have that unique blessing. So Levi was never multiplied exponentially in Egypt. So that's why the numbers of Levi were so much smaller than everybody else. Skipping a line or two, all the other people in Egypt, God was with them. And he said, let's see who wins this one. We are the Egyptians. This is the punishment for the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi reproduced at a normal rate. But they didn't have this miraculous growth like the other tribes. So that's the first answer the Ramban gives, a really interesting answer to think about. Then he gives another possibility. Maybe this is the offshoot of the anger that Yaakov had on Shimon and Levi. Shimon and Levi, of course, were the ones who went and killed all the men in that city that the master of the city had taken Dinah. And Yaakov was not happy with them. Shimon, we're actually going to see that when Shimon actually goes into the land of Israel, they have significantly less numbers than others. And many say that maybe this is an expression of Yaakov's disappointment and perhaps even anger, not perhaps, his anger at the predecessor of the tribe. So God didn't want to make it that Levi would become lessened in a plague. So God didn't want to punish Levi. Levi, it's this wonderful tribe, and they're the ones devoted to God. And when Moshe says who's going to rally towards God after the golden calf, Levi answers the call. So on the one hand, there needs to be a price to be paid for the fact that Levi was the one who went with Shimon to kill all those people. On the other hand, God doesn't want to kill members of the tribe of Levi in plague. So the Ramban says maybe it's just that from the outset he made them small in number. That's his second answer. Okay. Now let's go to the Orach Chaim. It's actually on the same subject, but it's on a later pasuk. If you jump ahead to pasuk Lamed Tes, the Orach Chaim, he brings down the Ramban's issue. He discusses different ideas. The Ramban discusses. He's not so excited about the ideas the Ramban discusses. But if you jump ahead to the Orach Chaim on Lamed Tes, it's around halfway through, maybe more like 60% of the way through this Orach Chaim. V'hanachon be'einayu. It's a pretty lengthy Orach Chaim. Orach Chaim on Lamed Tes. V'hanachon be'einayu. I think the pshat is ki shevet Levi ma'aseh echad lahem. Ma'aseh Amram asher shilach es ishto b'shvil gzeiras habein hayilot. The Orach Chaim says, remember the whole story with Moshe's parents. The Medrash tells us that Moshe's parents had separated because the decree had been that any Jewish boy who will be born will be cast into the river, and they didn't want to. Why bring children into a world like that? So they separated, and suggests the Orach Chaim, perhaps this wasn't unique to Moshe's parents. Perhaps this was the norm among the entire tribe of Levi. Vatam l'tzad shayu nagim v'lo nishtabdu lo namas levavim kol kach liros neteyem mushlachim b'yaor ma'aseh ish Yisrael asher mitzad hashibud v'ola aveira huzav v'hukol beineim v'libam liros yaldeim mushlachim b'yaor gam shayu mezalzlim ba'atzmim leiled v'ozav v'asados m'chilos ba'aretz. Basically, the Orach Chaim suggests maybe the people of, the people of Levi were leading a relatively easier life than the other tribes. That's the point we already touched on. They didn't have the same servitude that the other tribes did. So the other tribes, maybe they were so under the gun constantly, they didn't even have the emotional bandwidth to make decisions. We do want to have children. We don't want to have children. They just lived their lives. It was just getting up in the morning and just being pushed until night and then going back to bed. Levi was living a more normal life. So Levi could actually take a breath and look at their surroundings and make an assessment. So Orach Chaim says maybe Levi decided, the members of tribe of Levi in general, decided not to have children. And we just zero in on the story of Amram and Yocheved because that was a unique story that they were convinced to have a child by Miriam, and that child was Moshe. But maybe that's why the tribe of Levi has so fewer numbers, because maybe during this difficult time period they weren't interested in having kids. An interesting possibility. So we discussed the Ramban regarding the numbers given by the encampment formation, and now we discussed the Ramban, and we began to discuss the Orach Chaim regarding why the tribe of Levi would be so much smaller in number than the other tribes.